joining us for our first guest since we've been on a long hiatus. We really wanted someone that wasn't only a former Duck with tons of Duck experience, but also someone that I have a little bit of interview experience. In fact, 9 years ago, when you were working at the Register Guard, Rob Moseley, editor-in-chief of GoDucks.com, you were still on the handle at Duck Football on Twitter, and I reached out and I asked you, hey, I'm going through a journalism class all about interviewing. We need great interviews, and I thought no one better because just our little experiences after football practices. I thought this guy is a great interviewer. He has so much experience as not just a Duck, but a sports fan in general, and I loved your perspective on things. Rob, how did you get to where you are now since that moment?
Well, 2013 was the year I made the jump to U of O. The newspaper business, I kind of saw the writing on the wall for just how things were trending nationally. The Register Guard, where I worked, was awesome, like family run paper, and the Baker family there did an awesome job. But things were trending towards corporate ownership, which kind of changed the game, unfortunately, for local newspapers. So I tried to get out ahead of it a little bit and started thinking about what my next move was. I've never been a big kind of 5-year plan type guy or anything like that, but started thinking maybe I needed to think about a next move. And then the other major decision point was kind of the stratification of voices online, where you kind of Deadspin was just catching on, and Deadspin was all about having fun at people's expenses, kind of digging up scandals, trolling, things like that. And it was entertaining. I loved reading Deadspin, but it wasn't the kind of, news guy I wanted to be. And so it sort of felt like the eyeballs were either going to go to that or kind of the official team sites, kind of the fan sites. And that just seemed a lot more kind of in character with just who I am and what I like doing. So, which is not to disparage any other kind of writing or journalism or any of that, but just what fit me best was talking to U of O and seeing if a position here would work out. And so, yeah, 7 years later, still at it. Haven't screwed it up yet. Every day there's a chance to, but I'm still hanging on by a thread. So loving it every day.
Rob, I want to take it back a little bit, way before any of that went down, when you were actually in a very similar position to what I'm in now as a University of Oregon student back in the late 90s. What was that process like for you, seeing everything as it was then, and now 20 years plus later, being able to look at this program and seeing the evolution that's occurred across the board?
You're talking about Oregon football?
Oregon, the brand in general.
Got it. Yeah, I'll be honest with you. Like I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, I was a big pro sports fan. I didn't follow college sports. It just sounds weird to say now, but like when I got to Oregon, I'm not sure I'd ever watched an Oregon football game. When I was going through the application process, I'm not even sure if I knew for sure if Oregon was the Ducks or the Beavers, as strange as that is to say. Because now the whole country and even, parts of the whole world, when they see the O, they know it's the Oregon Ducks. So things that not to suggest my limited viewpoint when I was a high school kid it was universal by any means, but I don't think there are many kids now at the age now that I was then who would make that same mistake because it's changed exponentially, and obviously Phil and Penny Knight have a huge role in that. We owe them a huge debt for helping elevate this program, but a ton of other supporters too. So it has been fun to kind of track that. In my freshman year, I went to the Washington game in 1994. I mean, I was in the student section as an Oregon freshman for Kenny Wheaton's pick. I went down to the Rose Bowl that year, came back in that week. Oregon men's basketball hands UCLA its only loss of the year, their national championship season. I mean, and so I wasn't there for Chris Miller and Bill Musgrave. I wasn't there for the Jerry Fry years, but I sort of feel like in some regards I was there kind of on the ground floor for kind of when this really happened for Oregon. Because the 95 season was that Cotton Bowl season, that the famous year when Oregon goes to a back-to-back New Year's Day games, loses again. Phil Knight huddles up with Mike Bellotti, says, "What do you need?" Mike Bellotti says, "I need an indoor practice facility." Boom, the Mashofsky Center is constructed. Then the new logo, the rebrand with the new O, the uniforms become a thing. the rest is history. My last fall as a student was 1998, and I went to the Aloha Bowl that season to cover it for the Daily Emerald, and that's when the new uniforms. 99 was the first season in brand new, when the whole rebrand. So I was still a student when the whole rebrand happened too, which is it's just wild to think. So it is I've been lucky in a zillion ways. I was pretty fortunate to kind of been around right at this kind of epochal moment in the history of the program when things just totally took off.
Yeah, and on that evolution, you've been able to encapsulate such great, special talents that got drafted, like from Achille all the way up to Justin Herbert, who we're seeing ball out right now this season. If you could pick just one player, any sport, from when you were a student and when you were covering teams, that was your favorite to watch. If you had to pick just one and you had to erase all your memories of all the others, what would you pick?
That is an open-ended question. All right. From when I was a student, I was a huge fan of the Jeremy Asher, Rich Rule linebacker tandem from that gangrene defense. Those guys were, they had the huge shoulder pads and they're good dudes. They were characters. Peter Sermon and Matt Smith came right after those guys, and I was about the same age as those guys. And so those linebackers, those two linebacker duos, I really, really, and there were some other guys in between there, Chris Vandiver and Aaron Chevron, but there was just some good linebackers in there that I enjoyed watching. I don't know, for some reason that's the first guys to jump into my mind when I was a student. And since then, man, I've been fortunate to cover a lot of special kids. Maybe there's some recency bias, but watching Sabrina Ionescu and just the way she handled herself, the way she excelled on the court, but the way she handled herself off the court too, and particularly earlier this year with the tragedy with Kobe and everything. She's a 1 in a million kid, and I've Marcus was a 1 in a million guy. Ashton Eaton is a 1 in a million guy, Sabrina, another Bay Area kid too. So I've got a little soft spot for her that way. Another San Francisco Bay Area, Northern California kid. So she was. I don't have to tell anybody. Listening to this, probably she was pretty remarkable. Still is.
I kind of want to transition into the now a little bit. We've been able to talk a little bit about the past and everything, which is something that we specialize in here. But one of the things that excited me most about being able to get you on here was the amount of insight we were going to be able to have, especially with college football on the horizon, as well as the other sports being able to pick up soon after. I want to talk about this era of Oregon football that we're in, something like the Mario Cristobal era, if you would. Going into the hire, what were your kind of thoughts and expectations of it? And have those expectations been exceeded at all over the last 2-3 seasons?
Yeah. We'd been through such transition the last couple of years. 2016 was just such a hard year for everyone. I mean, and when you go through it, on the inside, it feels so personal. It was just so hard, and that staff was a bunch of good guys and guys that had been around for a long time, and it was traumatic to see them go, and the way that season went, and then the excitement with Coach Taggart, and he really did a kind of accomplish part of his mission, which was to kind of get us punched in the face and turned around and kind of stop believing our own headlines a little bit, for lack of a better term. Ironically, it's ironic for me to say something like that, use a metaphor like that, but, and then for him to leave, it was just such turmoil. And the guys who are in the program, at this point, I'm, 44 years old. I think I can call them kids. I think, it's like, they're young kids. It's a little much for some of those guys to be dealing with. And so you just want some stability. You want them to feel like, optimistic about their future, to feel like we're on a good track, to feel like as an athletic department, we're providing, a structure that can allow them to be successful and win. And so when they all rallied behind Mario, it was like, all right, sweet. If they believe, I'm not the decision maker, but just my perspective, outside the room of decisions being made is if the kids believe in him and Rob Mullins thinks, there are other reasons too to support making him the guy, that's awesome. Just give these kids, some stability, something to kind of latch on to and be stoked about and be invigorated by, because they've dealt with a whole lot the last couple of years. The thing I kind of underestimated, I'm not the biggest recruiting guy in the world, I mean, I follow kind of who we're recruiting, and I hope we get all the good guys, but I'm not like, I don't sweat it, too hard. I think, Nick, you saw internally every year, a bunch of guys come in, and a few guys who are supposed to be stars don't end up being stars, and a few guys that nobody ever really heard of in recruiting end up being great players. So I've kind of learned through experience only to kind of put so much stock into recruiting. So but I think I'm learning now just what it means to have someone who recruits at the level Mario does. I think I underestimated the impact, just what it meant to get somebody who recruits at the level he does, because he's so relentless. I mean, it's on his mind all the time. He's everything that happens every minute of the day, he views to some extent through the prism of recruiting. And it's just amazing. I mean, Coach Moorhead was doing an interview recently where someone asked him kind of what's different about this program and the way it recruits. And he said it's to have a head coach that's as engaged as Mario Cristobal is just different than anywhere else. And it's just, he's the driver. He sets the tempo, and you either run at his pace or you fall behind and get left behind. And it's just, so I knew he was like, considered this elite recruiter, and I was like, okay, that's great. We'll get some dudes. Cool. But to see it up close, and then to see, the dividends, and to see just what, that kind of talent looks like on a day in, day out basis at practice and in games, it's really something. It really is.
Yeah, and on that same note, back when we had our interview, it was in the O-line room, and it was a real good representation of our O-line at the time. A nice paint job on it, maybe a 3 or 4 star setup, a couple cups laying out, not looking too nice, not anybody's priority or showing anything off in recruiting, but we got the job done. You look at our offensive line now, and even just talking to Coach Cristobal myself, the one time I have, and he's already talking about, hey, you should come out and see these guys hit in practice. He's already talking about these guys going through the pre-practice drills. What do you see on the inside as that mentality change that really an O lineman brings to a program like Oregon?
Yeah, I think, and I do want to give a nod again to Coach Taggart. I think, kind of the toughness, just day to day, that being reinforced. We have to be tougher, and we have to be blue collar. And we're not just, we're not what everybody thinks Oregon is, where we're just glitz and glamour, and we're all finesse, and we're not power. I mean, Coach Taggart really does deserve a lot of credit for kind of helping kind of rebrand things internally. This is what we're going to be known as. We're going to be known as physical and in your face and tough, and not kind of the worst cliches about what Oregon is about. But Mario absolutely embodies that, every single day. I mean, he is the intensity he brings. You compare it to like a Coach Bellotti, who was just the cool customer. It may be fitting that he was like the Ducks coach. That image of the duck that is paddling frantically beneath the surface, but above the water just looked calm and cool and collected. I mean, that was Coach Bellotti. He just oozed kind of cool. And, where Mario, just the intensity just bleeds out of him, and it just, he exudes that through every pore. So, but Coach Mirabal deserves a ton of that credit for what happens with the offensive line too. And I do think this year in particular, it seems to me Coach Cristobal has taken a little bit more of a holistic approach. I mean, he's, there'd be some times in the past where you'd still think maybe he was the offensive line coach. And this year in particular, I think you'd be much less likely to make that mistake. He's roaming around the practice fields a little bit more, and it's definitely, those are Coach Mirabal's guys, and so he definitely deserves a ton of credit. The working relationship Mario and Coach Mirabal have is really something. They obviously go back decades to high school and everything, and it's you can see it on display every day. It's impressive, and it pays dividends.
So we've talked a lot about the building of this team, how this team's kind of come together over the last couple of seasons. I want to start to get specific about this 2020 season. It's going to be a season kind of unlike anybody's ever seen before. Only 6 games. It's going to be a compact schedule. It's starting late. It's in unprecedented circumstances. What about how this team is built do you think will benefit them going into such an unusual season?
Well, I mean, I think you want to have the older guys are, the more experienced guys are, kind of the more they've been through, the more they can weather. And so when you have a Jordan Scott and an Austin Fowley and Isaac Slade Matautia that have played a ton of football, Nick Pickett on the back end, Diamador Lenore on the back end. There's some veteran guys on the other side too, and Hunter Campmoyer and Johnny Johnson and CJ Verdell. To some extent, nobody knows exactly what we're getting into right now. But, if you've got some veteran guys to lean on, you'd assume they can kind of roll with the punches a little bit. And so I think it does help to have guys like that around. But it also helps to just be really, really, really good. And, Kayvon Thibodeau doesn't have the experience those other guys have, but he's really, really, really good. Mace Funa is that guy. It sure looks like, Sewell and Flo, the freshman linebackers, and even LeDuc, can be those guys that have impact. And, on the back end, there's young guys. Ron McKinley, I mean, that guy's as sharp as it comes, just a sophomore. But, I don't think there's going to be a lot that happens in front of him that he sees the offense doing that he doesn't know how to diagnose and try to get the defense set for. So you're not going to be perfectly equipped to handle whatever comes, particularly if, God forbid there's some sort of, a sickness befalls some position room or something like that. And somebody having to scramble and make up, and fill gaps there. I mean, there can be things that happen in these circumstances that no one's properly equipped to deal with. But if you've got quite a bit of experience and you've got a heck of a lot of talent, you feel pretty good about your chances to win games, kind of regardless of what else is going on around you.
Yeah, and in terms of everything that's going on, I wanted to know, players got to go back home. Things were up in the air for a long time. I was really interested this season in seeing what players took the off-season time and really developed on their own. Who is somebody you're seeing right now that you don't think people are talking about that just came back and just wowed you?
Well, now we're a couple weeks into camp. I think, people are starting to hear some of these names, but, I think of Jamal Hill, in the defensive secondary, replacing Javon Holland was going to be a big deal. And Jamal Hill just, he looks like a dude back there, just a playmaker. I think Sean Dollars amongst the running backs, some switch flipped for him last December. And he was big time in the bowl prep. He played Wisconsin's big running back for the scout team during the bowl prep and got rewarded with some reps in the Rose Bowl. So maybe there's kind of a chicken and the egg question. Did that jumpstart him, or was he jump started and therefore he was rewarded with that? It kind of goes hand in hand, but he just looks explosive and quick and just more electric. Devin Williams at receiver, just the sky's the limit for that guy. I think, he knew last year he wasn't going to play. It can be hard, day in, day out to bring it every day. And so, sometimes guys in that situation will have, consistency issues where, it's kind of a roller coaster. Some days they look like world beaters. Some days, it's kind of that you're bummed that, you're not going to play that weekend. And so, it's hard to have the same energy level. And not to suggest Devin went through that because I'm not in his head, but just the consistency of production and playmaking looks different from him right now than it did a year ago. I do think Tyler Shuck looks like a guy who just continues to elevate his game. CJ Verdell, Joe Moorhead was asked the other day kind of who are guys on offense that are really standing out. And, I think we all fall into the trap this time of year if, you're looking for the next big thing. So it's like, oh, is it Trey Benson or is it Chris Hudson or, these young guys? And the first name he said was CJ Verdell. It's like, oh yeah, guys run for 1,000 yards in back-to-back years. He's pretty good. Of course he's going to stand out. That just makes perfect sense. And he, CJ's, CJ's ability to, run between the tackles and break tackles and run with a physical presence we all know about, but he just looks like he has an extra gear, and just a little bit more wiggle. We kind of saw it, I think, for the first time really against Utah. He really opened people's eyes in the conference championship game last year, where, it wasn't just put my head down and go and run over a guy. He's got a little scoot to him too, where he can make a guy miss. And if he's doing that, he's just, I don't think there's many guys probably in the country that are much better. And he looks really good. So I could go on and on and on. It's that time of year. It's a really exciting time of year. And, at this point, you just can't wait to see the guys actually take the field in the game and just see how it plays out against another team.
Personally, I see Oregon as kind of faced with a somewhat unique challenge in that not only are they implementing a new offense and a new offensive coordinator, but they have a new quarterback as well as a fully new offensive line. What do you think a reasonable expectation for this offense is for Duck fans moving into the season?
Well, I think Coach Moorhead's offense, is really going to be beneficial under those circumstances because it presents it throws a lot of possibilities at a defense. It's really going to keep a defense on its toes with all the RPO stuff he likes to do. I mean, there's just, even if you correctly diagnose, what play is going to be run, there's still 3-4 options that can be thrown at you depending on what the quarterback sees. And I think Tyler's a sharp enough guy to run it. I think Anthony Brown's a sharp enough guy to run it too, if he's called upon too. So, I think that takes pressure off. Hey, we're just going to line it up and run it down your throat. That would put a little bit more pressure on, a young offensive line, for instance, or, not all these guys are young with some transfers but newer faces. It's not going to be quite the same pressure as that, or, hey, we're going to drop back and throw it 70 times. And these guys know they need to pass protect, on every single one of those snaps. There's a lot of pressure because the defense is going to be bringing it. Well, defense can't do that because there's just going to be a lot of different options to throw. So I do think, this is an offense that's going to keep a defense on its toes. And that can help when you're going through some transition like that. You do need your quarterback to be sharp to run this. There's a lot to process, and I think we saw that. You always expect the defense to be ahead of an offense early in the camp, and that was no different this year. But I think part of that could have been that there's a lot to diagnose with this offense when you're from the quarterback, but things have started to click. Week 2 and now into week 3. And I think Tyler looks like and Anthony as well, capable of kind of operating that, running the show there, orchestrating that. And so I think that's, hey, this is the time for optimism. That is a reason for optimism to think that, hey, despite some of the questions you bring up, which are reasonable, this schematically, this offense might be equipped to kind of help kind of ease the pressure on some newer faces.
With everything that's gone on in 2020 with COVID-19 and all the big bodies that play football, I've been very interested in watching a lot of the bigger guys slim down and you normally get those guys that gain weight, but I was very intrigued by especially Jordan Scott, a guy like you said that came in with the Taggart era and really helped change how we were playing football in the trenches right up front, and even came out and I would say was a significant reason we won the Husky game in 2018 because, it took 5 guys to block him every play. And I just speak to some of the things the team is doing that are a bit different this year in preparations in terms of COVID. And is that one of them consciously that the big guys are thinking about, especially?
I don't know if those two things are necessarily tied together. I think we're seeing from Coach Cristobal, we saw it particularly with that offensive line class a couple of years ago that, Panay was in and Stephen Jones and, Dawson Yaramillo, who's still around from that group, and a couple other guys. But then the defensive line classes, the Brandon Dorles, Christian Williams, Ken Ware Hudson group last year, and then this year, a fresh crop on the D line, just massive. It's like recruit massive dudes with huge frames, and maybe as a product of that, guys who might be carrying some bad weight, and then get them in here. Get them on the nutrition program, get them on the strength conditioning program, and over time, year over year, every year, they're going to change. They're going to change their body. So I just think, I don't know how much of a function of how crazy this year particularly is. I just feel like that's that seems to be whether it's a sort of stated intention or not. It seems to be kind of the process now. Just get giant dudes for the trenches, be willing to take a little bit of bad weight, knowing that if it's a big frame and an athletic guy, you can reshape him. With a guy like Jordan, yeah, it's been a year over year process. And, Popo Amava is another guy who his body looks totally different. And he's, when you've got a guy who's still that massive, 290 or whatever, but yet feels quicker and feels light on his feet. I mean, that's a problem up front. We saw Popo, kind of the light went on for him kind of in the middle of last year. And I think he's going to be a really good player on the D line this year. So, and again, same idea, just came in, was a first day he walks into practice, like, oh my God, that guy looks different than the normal freshman. Not necessarily in a good way, but then 2 years later, he looks like just a dude, and that just seems like kind of how we do business now.
Rob, we want to let you go sooner than later because we know your night's still not going to be done even when we're done talking to you here. The last question I'm going to ask you is a question I like to try to ask everybody, and it's just because I'm a nerd about the subject. I have to get into it. I always want to. What was the one time where you saw Oregon come out of that locker room and whatever it was they were wearing head to toe, you just went, wow, okay, this one is unbelievable. This one's outstanding. This uniform set is next level.
Probably the Duck uniforms against Colorado. I loved those. I'm not a big uniform guy. We put out the photos, Thursday or Friday, whatever, and I'm usually like, all right, that looks cool. Every once in a while, we'll put out the preview, and I'll be like, oh, that's a little different. But then you know what? The guys run out of the tunnel. I'm usually like, oh, that looks fine. It's like I don't get too high or too low about uniforms. The Duck uniform I thought looked really, really, really sharp. And I think I'll forever lament the fact that game went the way it did, because I would love if that had been part of the rotation for longer than just one game.
Well, as the official Once a Duck podcast, we approve of those uniforms also.
Outstanding.
We want to thank you for coming on and giving us this great insight to Duck football. In fact, everyone, you can find him at Twitter, on Twitter at Duck Football. Thank you, Rob Moseley.
Absolutely. Anytime, guys. I appreciate you having me.